Is the time. Let's talk about how we need to have, well, abundant, plentiful, cheap energy to power our economy, because that would be quite useful if we are going to build up our defences and help defend Ukraine and indeed Europe and indeed just our country. Is that not vital? Well, it all depends on that. So how come we have in the last 2 months of this year, so the first 2 months of 2025, why have we spent £252 million of taxpayers' money? That's £180,000 an hour to switch off wind farms because there's nowhere for the excess power to go. Let's talk about this with Andrew Montford. He's director of Net Zero Watch. Good morning to you, Andrew.
Good morning, Julia.
For those of us who don't follow these things, the madness this closely, why on earth are we paying to switch off wind farms, and why can't we keep the energy?
So the problem is that the wires down which the electricity travels aren't big enough to get all the power needed to market. So people are building wind farms, offshore wind farms in places like Scotland, and there's very little capacity in the wires over the border to the markets in England. So there is a sort of a gentleman's agreement between the wind farms and the grid that when that happens, the grid will essentially pay the wind farms to switch off. And yeah, as you say, it's £180,000 a minute. So we're currently up to about £1.5 billion a year. So, you know,
wow.
Yeah, it's utter madness. And it has to stop.
Well, I mean, it absolutely has to stop. It's absolutely crazy. The argument we're always heard from is like, you know, we need to move away from fossil fuels because we need to be energy self-sufficient, and we can do that with wind and solar. Sometimes sensible people mention nuclear, but of course wind and solar can only provide electricity. That's only 20% of our energy needs anyway, so just don't worry about the 80%, the rest of it. Obviously, we just ignore that. But we've got a problem when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. We don't have energy from those sources, so we need to have backup gas, imported or natural or homegrown or nuclear. And again, we've got less and less of both. And when the wind does blow too much, you have to turn the wind farms off. When it blows just enough, but we don't need that amount of energy that time, we can't store it. This seems to me to be the most extraordinarily energy inefficient system.
It is extraordinarily inefficient. Essentially, as you say, you have to have two separate power generation systems.
Yeah.
You have the wind and solar one, which will generate if the wind is blowing and or the sun is shining, and then you need to have a load of gas-fired power stations for when it isn't blowing. And the problem is, you know, that means you have the capital cost and the maintenance costs of all those gas-fired power stations, which you're barely using, but you have to keep them there for the times which are quite, you know, not that often when the wind doesn't blow. So yeah, this is incredibly expensive and incredibly damaging to the economy. Now, what's happened is when we started doing renewables in about 2002, over the next sort of 18 years or so, up to about 2020, electricity prices doubled. And, you know, that trend is going to continue. We've had a blip since because of the Ukraine war, but, you know, that's largely gone away now. The gas prices have returned to normal, but the renewables prices, the cost of electricity is still going to rise.
Am I not right in thinking that a lot of the cost of electricity price is actually because the last bit of electricity we use is based on the gas price, and gas prices have gone up, and we've still got this just a bizarre system where the price is set based on the last unit of electricity, and if that's produced by gas, which it always is, then it's gas prices that set that price.
You are absolutely right.
I can't believe I got that right.
It is something of a misconception, though. The thing is, yes, the wind farms get the same price that the gas-fired power stations do, which is higher, but that's still not enough to make a wind farm profitable.
Right.
So we have to give it a subsidy on top. Now, if you're going to have some other system where they don't get the gas price, yes, they'll get a lower price, but you'll just have to give them a bigger subsidy. So that's not actually going to get you anywhere.
It's almost like it would make more sense if we just went with reliable fossil fuels or nuclear in the first place, isn't it? I mean, that's a crazy idea. But this report today, with those figures, that comes out at the same time as a new report by researchers at the investment bank Peel Hunt. And they say that the UK's net zero drive is making families poorer, squeezing living standards. They questioned whether the decarbonisation efforts by Britain is actually to blame for the country's productivity crisis. They say there's a clear link. I would say I would say this is more of a correlation than a causal link between falling energy capacity and weak productivity in the UK. I think we've got weak productivity for lots of other reasons as well. But it's really interesting. Banks and all, in fact, we had the big, companies, energy companies like BP for years have played along with the whole green thing and signed up to it all. And even BP has gone, right, we're done with this now. We're losing money. It's not going to work. We're going to go back to reliable fossil fuels. But now we've got a major bank saying, look, the numbers don't add up anymore. Do you think that the tide has turned? And is that down to the likes of Donald Trump actually just saying, we're not doing this nonsense anymore?
We are very much at high tide now. You can see this wherever you look. It's not just this one bank who's turned away. There's been a whole series of banks across the world who have been leaving, these sort of international green banking programs that the politicians have set up, and they say we're having nothing to do with that. The politicians are turning against it too. Reform obviously have been against it, net zero, for quite a while, but we're starting to see very sceptical noises from the Conservative politicians as well. And even there was the rumour over the weekend that Ed Miliband is going to be given the boot. So maybe we'll,
Well, he'd only resign. I mean, if they did drop the net zero policy, he'd resign. But again, I've always blamed Keir Starmer for that. He's completely signed up to that madness. But again, the most cursory looking at this, the most basic mathematics will tell you this doesn't add up. And you cannot have a thriving economy. You cannot have growth unless you've got abundant, plentiful, cheap energy. And you cannot have that if you're pushing towards net zero. I mean, they are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, you can see our economy in the UK grew once we got our hands on concentrated, reliable forms of electricity, of energy, like coal. Now we're moving back to the unreliable forms of energy we used before we got into coal. So, it's like wood and wind. I mean, this is madness. So, yes, of course the economy is going backwards. Of course productivity is stuck in the mud. It was inevitable. And we've been saying that for 20 years. But, of course, politicians have only just started listening to us.
I've been listening, which is, again, and it's just you only need to have the fact. Don't need to have opinion. It's just fact. Andrew Montford, Director of Net Zero Watch, thank you. Thank you for all your work over the years as well, trying to push